The wind came down from the high plains like it had a grudge against anyone still breathing. It rattled the cottonwoods along the creek and pushed dust across the open range in long, restless sheets. Folks said a man could feel his past out here if he stood still long enough. The rancher knew that feeling well. He had buried his past beneath miles of grassland, barbed wire, and long days that began before sunup and ended when the stars took over. He believed solitude was a fair trade for peace until the night two women appeared at his gate and changed the quiet order of his life. He had built his ranch with his own hands, one post at a time, after the war left him with more memories than he cared to count. The land sat far from town, a place where the old American frontier still breathed through cracked earth and open sky. Coyotes cried at night, cattle shifted in their sleep, and the rancher learned to trust the sound of his own boots more than any promise made by another soul. He kept his door close to trouble, or so he thought. That night, trouble came riding on a broken-down wagon, pulled by a tired mule and driven by a woman wrapped in black. Her veil was thin and worn, more for custom than comfort, and the wind pressed it against her face so he could see the strain in her eyes. Beside her sat another woman, younger, with dust in her hair and fire in her gaze. They looked nothing alike at first glance, yet grief tied them together tighter than blood alone ever could. The rancher did not ask their names right away. Out here, names carried weight, and he had learned to listen before speaking. The widow told her story in a steady voice that shook only once. Her husband had died on the trail, struck down by fever before they could reach kin further west. Bandits had taken what little money they carried. The wagon was all they had left, along with the clothes on their backs and the mule that barely kept moving. Winter was closing in, and the plains showed no mercy to those without shelter. He looked at the sky, already turning the color of cold iron, and then at the women again. He saw hunger, fear, and something else beneath it all. Hope, thin as it was, still burned there. Turning them away would have been easy. He could have pointed toward town and shut his gate. But the land had taught him a different code, one older than law books and deeper than pride. He gave them shelter that night, clearing space in the barn and bringing out blankets that still smelled faintly of sun and hay. The widow thanked him with quiet dignity. Her sister watched him closely, as if measuring the shape of his kindness and deciding whether it was real. He noticed that look and felt a stir of unease he could not place. Days passed, and the storm that had chased them to his door refused to move on. Snow came early, soft at first, then thick enough to bury the fence lines. The women stayed, helping where they could. The widow mended clothes and cooked meals that tasted of care and memory. Her sister took to the work with surprising strength, hauling water, feeding stock, and riding fence with a fearless ease that made the rancher take notice. The ranch had always been quiet, but now it carried new sounds. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. Footsteps crossed the porch at dawn. At night, the fire burned longer, and shadows danced on the walls in ways that stirred old feelings the rancher thought he had put to rest. He told himself it was only the cold, only the strain of shared space, but the lie grew thinner with each passing evening. The widow carried her grief like a carefully folded letter, never far from her heart. She spoke of her late husband with respect and sorrow, but not with bitterness. Sometimes she sat by the window, watching the snow fall, her hands folded in her lap. The rancher felt drawn to her calm strength, to the way she endured without complaint. In her presence, the world seemed slower, steadier. Her sister was another matter entirely. She met hardship head-on, jaw set, eyes bright. She challenged the rancher without meaning to, questioning his ways, pushing him to see beyond routine. When she smiled, it was sudden and warm, like sunlight breaking through cloud cover. When she grew quiet, the room felt empty even when she stood right there. The tension crept in slowly, like frost along a fence rail. The rancher caught himself watching both women when he should have been minding his work. He noticed the way the widow's hand lingered when she passed him a cup of coffee, and the way her sister's laughter softened when he spoke. Neither woman said a word, yet the air between them all grew thick with things left unsaid. At night, the cold pressed close, slipping through every crack in the walls. The rancher slept on his bedroll near the fire when the wind howled too loud to ignore. More than once, he woke to find one of the women awake as well, staring into the flames as if seeking answers there. The shared warmth felt innocent enough, born of necessity, yet it stirred something deeper, something dangerous. He knew the talk that would start if anyone in town heard of it. A rancher sheltering a widow and her sister on the far edge of the frontier would give rise to stories faster than a prairie fire. Honor mattered to him. So did restraint. But winter had a way of testing a person's resolve, stripping life down to its rawest needs. The widow struggled with guilt she never voiced. She felt torn between loyalty to the past and the quiet pull of the present. The rancher saw it in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Her sister, less bound by memory, wrestled with her own conflict. She respected her sister's loss, yet she could not deny the spark she felt in this place with this man under this wide and unforgiving sky. The rancher stood between them without meaning to, caught in a space he had never planned to occupy. He told himself he was only doing what was right, offering shelter on the frontier as any decent soul would. Still, his heart beat harder each day, and the silence between the three of them grew heavier than the snow on the roof. One evening, as the wind eased and the stars returned, the rancher stepped outside to check the stock. The women followed, drawn by the sudden calm. They stood together, looking out over the land that had brought them all to this moment. The widow spoke softly about starting over. Her sister spoke of freedom and the chance to choose a new path. The rancher listened, knowing that whatever came next would change all of them. The fire inside the house crackled low, waiting. The night pressed in, full of questions with no easy answers. 3 lives had crossed on this stretch of old American soil, bound by shelter, survival, and feelings that refused to stay buried. As the rancher turned back toward the door, he felt the weight of the choice forming before him, and he knew that when morning came, the quiet balance they shared would not hold. Morning came slow and pale, as if the sun itself was unsure whether to rise. Frost clung to the grass, and the ranch lay quiet under a thin veil of white. The rancher was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bedroll, boots in hand. Sleep had come in short stretches, broken by thoughts he could not settle. The women moved about the house softly. Their presence felt, even when unseen, like a low hum beneath the stillness. He stepped outside to breathe the cold air and clear his head. The land stretched out before him, wide and honest, unchanged by the troubles of those who crossed it. He had always trusted the land to tell him who he was. Lately, it only reflected his uncertainty. Shelter had been easy to give. Understanding what followed was not. The widow stood at the stove when he returned, stirring a pot with steady care. She greeted him with a small nod and a faint smile that carried both gratitude and restraint. She had learned to measure every word since her loss, guarding her heart as one might guard a wound that had not fully healed. The rancher respected that. He saw how she carried herself with quiet dignity, how she worked without complaint, how she kept her grief private even in moments of shared warmth. Her sister came in moments later, cheeks red from the cold, eyes bright with purpose. She spoke easily of the work ahead, of fences needing repair and cattle to be moved once the thaw came. Her energy filled the room, shifting its mood without effort. The rancher listened, answering when needed, careful not to let his attention linger too long on either woman. As the days passed, the storm loosened its grip, but winter still held the plains in a firm hand. Supplies ran low, and the rancher decided he would have to ride into town soon. The thought unsettled him. Town meant questions, glances, and stories told behind hands. He had kept his life simple for a reason. Bringing others into it, even for the right reasons, carried risks he could not ignore. The widow offered to stay behind if he wished, to keep the place in order while he was gone. Her sister insisted on riding along, arguing that 2 pairs of eyes were better than one on winter roads. The rancher hesitated, weighing the choice. In the end, he decided to go alone. He told himself it was safer that way. Deep down, he knew he needed the distance, even if only for a day. While he was gone, the sisters settled into a quiet rhythm. The widow tended the house, finding comfort in routine. She thought often of the life she had lost and the strange sense of possibility she now felt. Guilt followed those thoughts like a shadow. She wondered what it meant to begin again, and whether such a thing was even allowed for someone in her place. Her sister worked outside, mending what she could and learning the land. She felt alive here, despite the hardship. The frontier did not judge or remember. It only asked that you endure. Still, her thoughts drifted often to the rancher. She admired his steadiness, his restraint, the way he carried his past without letting it harden him. She sensed the pull between them all and did not know how to name it. When the rancher returned at dusk, his horse tired and his face drawn, the women knew something had shifted. He brought news without saying much. Supplies had been scarce. Prices were rising. Winter would be harder than expected. He also carried the weight of town gossip, though he kept that to himself. He had heard enough to know that their isolation would not last forever. That night, the 3 of them sat near the fire, eating in silence. The flames cast long shadows, stretching and folding across the walls. Each of them felt the unspoken tension settle in the room, heavier now for all that had been left unsaid. The rancher spoke at last, his voice low and careful. He told them they were welcome to stay as long as needed, but the choice was theirs. He would not decide for them. The widow looked into the fire, considering his words. Safety meant more than shelter. It meant trust, and trust carried risk. She had lost once already. The thought of opening her heart again frightened her more than the cold ever could. Yet the idea of leaving, of returning to the road with nothing but memory, felt unbearable. Her sister met the rancher's gaze without hesitation. She thanked him plainly and said she would stay until spring at least. The widow nodded slowly in agreement. The decision was made, but its consequences lingered in the air like smoke. Over the following weeks, the ranch became something different than it had ever been before. It was no longer just a place of work and solitude. It became a shared space shaped by 3 lives moving around one another with care and caution. Small moments took on greater meaning. A shared laugh over a simple meal. A hand brushed while passing tools. A look held a second too long. The rancher found himself torn between duty and desire, though he would not call it that. He believed in doing right by others, in honoring boundaries even when no one else was watching. Yet he was human, shaped by loneliness and the need for connection. The frontier tested a person not only through hardship, but through closeness where none had existed before. The widow struggled with her place in this new arrangement. She felt both protected and exposed. Some nights, she dreamed of her late husband and woke with tears on her face. Other nights, she lay awake listening to the wind, aware of the warmth nearby and the strange comfort it brought. She questioned her own heart, unsure whether it was betrayal to feel anything beyond grief. Her sister watched all of this with a mix of concern and longing. She did not wish to cause harm, least of all to her own kin. Yet she could not deny her own feelings, nor the sense that something important was unfolding around them. The rancher's presence grounded her, made the uncertain future feel possible. She wondered whether silence was kindness or simply another form of fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in muted colors, the rancher found himself caught between the sisters on the porch. The widow spoke of plans for the spring, of gardens and fresh starts. Her sister spoke of riding further west, of land yet unseen. The rancher listened, realizing that whatever choice came next would pull them all in different directions. The wind picked up again that night, carrying with it the reminder that the frontier did not wait for anyone to make peace with their feelings. Winter still had its grip, and the future remained uncertain. As the fire burned low and the house settled into sleep, the tension that bound them together remained unresolved. Steady and patient, waiting for the moment it would finally demand to be faced. The days grew longer, but the cold stayed sharp, as if winter meant to remind them who held the upper hand. Snow melted by noon and froze again by dusk, turning the yard into a patchwork of mud and ice. The rancher kept busy from dawn until dark, fixing what winter had strained and planning for what spring might bring. Work had always been his refuge. Now it felt like a thin wall against thoughts he could not outrun. The widow watched him from a distance more often than she meant to. She told herself she was only grateful that her attention came from respect and dependence. Yet she noticed the lines of worry around his eyes, the careful way he spoke, the effort he made to keep things proper between them. His restraint stirred something in her that grief alone could not explain. She felt caught between two lives, one already lived and one she had not dared to imagine. Her sister sensed the same pull but named it differently. To her, the rancher represented possibility, not safety alone but choice. She had spent much of her life following others, moving where she was told, accepting what came. On this stretch of frontier land, she felt her own will sharpen. She worked harder than needed, rode farther than required, as if proving to herself that she belonged here. Still, her thoughts circled back to him, and she wondered if he saw her as anything more than help passing through. The rancher noticed both women changing in small ways. The widow spoke more freely now, sharing pieces of her past when the mood was quiet. Her sister grew more confident, challenging him with questions about the land and his plans. He felt the tension rising like a storm that refused to break. He knew that doing nothing was itself a choice, one that carried its own risks. Trouble came one afternoon in the form of distant riders. The rancher spotted them from the ridge, dark shapes moving against the pale ground. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Out here, visitors rarely arrived without reason. He told the women to stay inside while he rode out to meet them. The widow's face tightened with fear she could not hide. Her sister reached for a tool, ready to defend if needed. The riders turned out to be men from town, bringing word and curiosity in equal measure. They asked questions about winter losses, about cattle, about how many were staying on the ranch these days. Their eyes lingered too long, their smiles edged with interest. The rancher answered calmly, keeping his voice even. He felt the weight of their attention and the danger of loose talk. The frontier might be wide, but rumors traveled fast. After the men left, the ranch felt smaller. The widow worried aloud about what people might say. She had lived under judgment before and knew its cost. Her sister brushed off the concern, though the tension in her shoulders told a different story. The rancher assured them both that he would handle whatever came. Even as he spoke, he wondered whether he believed it himself. That night, sleep came hard. The rancher lay awake, listening to the house settle. He thought about honor, about responsibility, about the unspoken bonds forming under his roof. He did not want to be the cause of pain, yet he could not deny the growing sense that he stood at the center of something he could not control. The widow woke before dawn and sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl. She watched the sky lighten and thought of the road that had brought her here. Loss had taught her to expect little. Still, she felt the stirrings of hope, fragile and dangerous. She wondered whether the rancher felt the same pull, and whether it was wrong to want comfort after so much sorrow. Her sister rose soon after, stepping quietly into the cold morning. She took the horse out early, riding along the fence line to clear her head. The open land steadied her, yet her thoughts returned again and again to the ranch house. She feared being seen as reckless, feared hurting her sister, feared losing the one place that had begun to feel like her own. The conflict gnawed at her, sharpening her resolve even as it clouded her judgment. As weeks passed, small disagreements surfaced, not spoken aloud but felt. The widow grew more careful, more reserved, as if retreating behind old walls. Her sister grew bolder, speaking her mind with less restraint. The rancher found himself caught between these shifts, unsure how to respond without tipping the balance. He tried to treat them equally, yet equality did little to ease the undercurrent of rivalry and unspoken longing. A broken fence brought the tension into the open one afternoon. The rancher and the younger sister worked side by side, hands numb from cold, tempers short from exhaustion. Words were exchanged, sharper than intended. She accused him of shutting her out. He accused her of pushing too hard. The argument ended as quickly as it began, leaving both unsettled and aware of how close they stood to something neither was ready to name. The widow saw them from the porch, her heart tightening. She felt a mix of jealousy and guilt that surprised her. She reminded herself of her place, of her past, of the vows that still weighed on her spirit. Yet she could not ignore the sense that time was moving on without her consent. That evening, the three of them sat together again, the fire low and steady. Conversation stayed on safe ground, but the air felt charged. Each glance, each pause, carried meaning. The rancher spoke of spring plans, of expanding the herd, of repairs that would need doing. The widow listened, imagining a future she was not sure she was allowed to claim. Her sister listened, wondering whether she would still be there to see it. Outside, the wind rose once more, rattling the windows and reminding them of the frontier's indifference. Inside, three people sat bound by circumstance and feeling, each facing a choice they were not yet ready to make. The conflict between duty and desire, past and future, safety and freedom grew heavier with every passing day. And as winter held on a little longer than expected, it became clear that when the thaw finally came, it would bring more than just change in the land. Spring teased the plains before fully arriving, offering warmer afternoons followed by nights that still cut deep. The rancher felt the change in the soil beneath his boots and in the restless energy that filled the house. Winter had forced them close. Now the coming thaw threatened to pull everything apart. He sensed that whatever had been held back could not stay buried much longer. Work increased as the days stretched. Calving season approached, fences needed attention, and supplies had to be rationed carefully until the next trip to town. The rancher pushed himself harder, hoping effort would steady his thoughts. Instead, it sharpened them. Every shared glance felt heavier. Every quiet moment carried the weight of what remained unspoken. The widow struggled most during this time. The return of birds and the smell of damp earth stirred memories of another spring long ago, when life had seemed certain and full of promise. Grief returned in waves, mingled now with confusion. She felt pulled toward the rancher not out of need, but out of understanding. He did not press her. He did not ask for more than she could give. That patience made her question her resolve even more. Her sister felt the coming change like a challenge. She grew restless, talking often of what lay beyond the ranch, of towns rising further west and lands still unclaimed. Yet each time she mentioned leaving, her gaze flicked toward the rancher, searching for something she could not quite define. She wanted him to see her strength, her loyalty, her willingness to stand her ground. At the same time, she feared hearing words that might bind her before she was ready. The rancher noticed the strain between the sisters growing sharper. Small silences stretched longer. Kindness sometimes came edged with caution. He felt responsible, though he had never made a promise to either of them. Still, his presence had changed the course of their lives, just as they had changed his. The frontier had a way of forcing such reckonings. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in, dark clouds swallowing the sky without warning. The rancher and the younger sister were caught out on the range, driving cattle toward shelter as rain turned to sleet. Wind howled across the open land, blinding and fierce. In the chaos, a calf went missing, and the rancher rode hard to find it, signaling for her to stay back. She did not listen. Fear and determination drove her forward. When they finally found the calf trapped near a ravine, the danger became clear. The ground was slick, the wind relentless. For a moment, balance failed, and the rancher felt the sharp jolt of panic as he reached for her. They steadied each other just in time, hearts racing, breath ragged from cold and fear. The ride back was silent. The storm pressed in around them, and the closeness felt different now, sharpened by what might have been lost. When they reached the ranch, the widow ran to meet them, relief flooding her face. She took in the sight of them together, soaked and shaken, and something tightened in her chest. That night, the storm battered the house. The three of them gathered near the fire, the wind rattling the walls like a warning. No one spoke of what had happened, yet it hovered between them, heavy and alive. The rancher felt the moment slipping towards something he could no longer control. The widow broke the silence at last. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. She spoke of fear, of how close they all lived to loss, and of how little time could truly be counted on. She did not accuse or demand. She simply spoke the truth she had been carrying alone. The rancher listened, every word settling deep. Her sister listened too, her usual boldness softened. She saw her sister's pain clearly now, no longer filtered through her own longing. Guilt and affection tangled inside her, making it hard to breathe. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but found no words that would not cause more harm. The rancher felt torn apart by the honesty in the room. He cared for both women in different ways, ways that did not fit neatly into rules or expectations. He knew the frontier allowed for many kinds of lives, yet the weight of responsibility pressed on him all the same. He promised only this, that he would not let fear decide for them. It was not much, but it was all he could offer without breaking something fragile. In the days that followed, tension climbed higher. The storm had marked a turning point. Town gossip reached them again through a passing trader, sharper this time, more insistent. People were talking. Judgments were being made by those who knew nothing of the choices forced by winter and survival. The widow worried about her reputation and what little security she still possessed. Her sister bristled at the idea of being pushed out by rumor and expectation. The rancher considered his options late into the night. He thought of selling part of the land, of making changes that would signal stability and intention. He thought of asking one or both of them to leave before circumstances decided for them. Each thought felt like a betrayal of something he could not yet name. Spring finally broke through in earnest. Grass greened the hills, and the air warmed enough to carry the scent of life returning. With it came travelers on the roads and renewed interest in land and opportunity. The ranch no longer felt hidden from the world. The shelter it had provided now stood exposed. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the rancher called the women together. His voice carried a seriousness that made both of them tense. He spoke of change, of the season turning, and of the need to face what lay ahead rather than waiting for it to arrive uninvited. He did not yet say what choice he meant to make, only that it could not be delayed much longer. The widow felt her heart pound. She sensed the edge of a decision that could either set her free or bind her again. Her sister felt the same fear, mixed with resolve. Neither woman knew what the rancher would say next, only that whatever came would shape all of their lives. Outside, the plain stretched wide and open, holding both promise and uncertainty. Inside, three people stood on the brink of change, the tension between them drawn tight as a wire. The frontier had tested them through cold and isolation. Now it tested them through choice, and the answer waited just beyond the moment they were brave enough to cross. The rancher stood there a long moment after speaking, letting the quiet do its work. The fire popped softly behind them, and outside the frogs had begun to sing in the shallow water left by melting snow. Spring was no longer a promise. It was here, steady and real. At last he drew a breath and said what he had been carrying since winter's worst night. He told them he would not let rumor or fear decide their lives. He had built this ranch to be a place of honesty and hard work, not a hiding place from choice. He admitted that shelter had turned into something deeper, something none of them had planned. He spoke carefully, not to spare himself, but to honor them both. The frontier had taught him that truth, spoken plain, was the strongest fence a person could build. The widow listened with tears in her eyes, but she did not look away. When he finished, she stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. She said she had lived too long in the shadow of loss, believing her life had ended with her husband's last breath. Winter on the ranch had shown her otherwise. She spoke of gratitude, of the kindness that had kept her alive, and of the feelings she could no longer deny. She also spoke of respect for her sister and for herself, making clear that whatever path lay ahead must be chosen freely. Her sister felt her chest tighten as she listened. When it was her turn, she surprised herself with how steady her voice sounded. She spoke of independence, of the hunger for a life shaped by her own hands. She admitted the pull she felt toward the rancher, but she did not dress it up as something it was not. She said the frontier had taught her courage, and courage meant knowing when to hold on and when to step aside. She did not want her future built on rivalry or quiet resentment. The rancher felt the weight lift slightly as each woman spoke. The truth had not shattered them. It had drawn clear lines where confusion once lived. He thanked them both, his voice thick with emotion he did not try to hide. Then he made his choice, not in haste, but with the calm certainty of a man who knew his ground. He told the widow that if she wished to stay, not as someone passing through, but as his partner, he would welcome her with respect and patience. He spoke of building something steady, rooted in shared work and trust, not born of fear or need. He did not promise ease, only honesty in a home where her past would be honored, not erased. He turned then to her sister and spoke just as plainly. He told her she had a place on the ranch for as long as she wanted it, but he understood her restlessness. He said the frontier was wide and her strength belonged wherever she chose to carry it. There was no dismissal in his words, no closing of doors, only the recognition that some paths were meant to lead outward. Silence followed, deep and full. The widow reached for her sister's hand, squeezing it gently. There was sadness there, but also relief. The younger woman smiled through her tears and nodded. She said she had known, somewhere deep inside, that this was how it would be. Love, she realized, did not always mean staying. Sometimes it meant stepping back so others could move forward. In the days that followed, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The widow began planning in earnest, planting a garden and talking with the rancher about expanding the house. Her laughter returned, softer than her sister's but just as real. The rancher found himself sleeping easier, his nights no longer filled with unanswered questions. Her sister prepared for her journey west with the same determination she brought to everything else. The rancher helped her fix up a spare horse and pack supplies for the road. The widow stitched a small blanket for her saddle, something to carry warmth and memory across the plains. Their goodbyes were not rushed. They stood together beneath a wide sky, bound by shared winter and honest choice. When the younger woman rode away, she did not look back with regret. She felt pride, knowing she had faced her heart without letting it harden. The frontier stretched before her, full of risk and promise, and she rode toward it with her head high. Life on the ranch grew fuller with time. The widow and the rancher worked side by side, learning each other's ways in small, meaningful moments. They spoke often, never assuming, always choosing again. Town gossip faded as spring work demanded attention, and those who visited the ranch saw not scandal, but a household built on respect and resolve. The land responded in kind. Grass grew thick, cattle thrived, and the creek ran clear. The rancher felt a peace he had not known since before the war, not because his life was perfect, but because it was honest. The widow found herself smiling at the future, no longer afraid that happiness would betray her past. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains in gold, they sat together on the porch. The rancher took her hand, rough and warm, and she leaned into him without fear. They spoke of seasons to come, of work and rest, of the quiet strength it took to build something lasting on the frontier. Far to the west, a lone rider moved across open land, carrying the lessons of winter and the promise of choice. On the ranch, two lives moved forward together, shaped by hardship, shelter, and the courage to face what the heart demanded. The frontier remained wide and unforgiving, but it also remained fair to those willing to meet it with truth. And in that balance, the ranch stood strong, a place where loss had given way to hope, and where the long winter had finally, fully come to an end.